Clara May Whitaker pressed her palms flat against the church door and listened to her own sister's laughter float through the wood like something beautiful that had never belonged to her. Inside, her father was offering Rosalie to the most powerful man in the county. Outside, Clara stood in the summer dust with flowers still on her hands and no one coming to tell her to come in. If this story of a woman who refused to disappear moves something in your heart, subscribe to this channel. Follow Clara's story all the way to the end and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1814 came to Harlan County, Virginia, like a punishment. The creek behind the Whitaker property had dropped 2 feet since May. The pasture grass had gone yellow and brittle before July even arrived, crackling under boot heels like something already dead. The Whitaker cattle, what remained of them, moved slow and dull-eyed through the heat ribs beginning to show through their hides, the way debt shows through a desperate man's smile. Clara May Whitaker had been awake since before the sun came up. She'd hauled water from the creek to the livestock troughs before the morning was even light enough to see by. She'd patched the gap in the south fence with wire and her own bleeding hands. She'd kept the account ledger open on the kitchen table through breakfast, running figures in pencil, while her father drank his coffee and stared out the window at nothing useful. She was 25 years old, and she could not remember a morning that had looked any different. "Clara," her father said, not looking at her. "Get your sister ready by noon. Press the blue dress, the good one." "I pressed it yesterday," Clara said quietly. "Press it again. I don't want a single wrinkle on her when Cole arrives." Clara set down her pencil. "Ethan Cole is coming here." Henry Whitaker finally looked at her. Then the way a man looks at a tool he picks up when he needs it and puts back down when he's finished. "To the church social. The whole county's going. I need Rosalie looking her best." He paused. "You can come too if you want. Somebody has to carry the bread basket." She didn't answer. She went back to the ledger. That was the difference between Clara May Whitaker and her sister, and everyone in Harlan County understood it without anyone having to say it out loud. Rosalie Whitaker was the daughter Henry displayed. Clara was the daughter Henry used. The Harlan County Summer Social was held in the white clapboard church at the center of town every August, and it was the one afternoon of the year when people pretended money troubles and land disputes and neighborly grudges didn't exist. Tables were set up in the yard beneath the elm trees. Pies and cornbread and cold ham were laid out on checked cloth. The men stood in groups talking cattle prices and weather. The women circled Rosalie Whitaker the moment she stepped down from the wagon. "Lord, doesn't she look lovely? That yellow hair, I swear it gets prettier every summer." "Henry Whitaker, you are a blessed man to have a daughter like that." Henry smiled the smile of a man accepting compliments that weren't truly his to take. He put his hand on Rosalie's back and steered her gently through the crowd like a prized mare he was walking to the auction ring. Clara climbed down from the wagon on her own. She was still carrying the breadbasket. She was sunburned across the nose and cheekbones in a way that society in 1814 did not consider attractive. Her dress was clean, but it was not the blue one that was on Rosalie's back. Her hair was pinned up plain and practical, no curls, no ribbon. She walked behind her father and her sister the way a shadow walks behind a person present attached entirely unremarked upon. The Reverend's wife caught her eye and gave her a small pitying smile. Clara looked away. She set the breadbasket on the food table and stepped back to find somewhere to stand. The crowd had naturally rearranged itself around Rosalie the way iron filings arrange themselves around a magnet. There was no malice in it, or at least no deliberate malice. People simply gravitated toward the bright and beautiful things, and they did not think to wonder what they were leaving in the shadows. Clara found a spot near the church door and stood there back against the warm wood and watched her family belong to a gathering that had no particular place for her. "Gug." She heard Silas Boone before she saw him. His laugh was the kind of laugh that expected everyone around it to laugh too, whether they found anything funny or not. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick through the middle, wearing a coat that cost more than any family in Harlan County spent on feed in a year. He dealt in cattle, Or rather, he dealt in other people's cattle, acquiring them through contracts that desperate men signed without reading carefully enough, and then spent years trying to understand what they had actually agreed to. Henry Whitaker owed Silas Boone a considerable sum. Clara knew the number exactly. She knew it the way she knew the water level in the creek and the price of winter feed and the precise date each payment was due. She had written it in the ledger herself. She had written the interest calculations in the margin in small, careful pencil figures that her father had never once looked at. Silas crossed the churchyard with his hand extended toward Henry. His smile, the wide, easy smile of a man who knew he held every card. "Henry," he said, "good summer for you, I hope." "Getting by," Henry said, and shook his hand. Silas's eyes moved to Rosalie like a banker appraising a piece of property. "And this must be your youngest. My. He took Rosalie's hand and bent over it. "The whole county talks about your beauty, Miss Whitaker. I can see they haven't exaggerated." Rosalie smiled politely, the careful, practiced smile of a young woman who had been receiving this particular kind of attention since she was 16 and had learned to navigate it the way one navigates a narrow road with a steep drop on one side. "Thank you, Mr. Boone," she said. Nothing more. Silas looked past her, then found Clara standing at the edge of the group. He looked at her for exactly the amount of time it took to determine she was of no particular interest, and then looked away. Clara had stopped being stung by that particular motion. She'd catalogued it. The eyes that landed on her took quick measure and moved on. The social calculation that happened in less than a second. The invisible door that closed without ever opening. She had filled 3 ledger books with the numbers that kept her family alive, and not one person in the county knew her name, except as an afterthought after Rosalie's. Ethan Cole arrived at noon. Clara heard the shift in the crowd noise before she saw him, a kind of collective attention, the way a room changes when someone walks into it who carries authority without announcing it. She turned, and he was walking through the gate at the far end of the churchyard, pulling off his hat as he entered, running one hand through dark hair, gone damp at the temples from the heat. He was 32, tall and lean, the way men get when they work hard ground under a relentless sun. His face was weathered and quiet. He didn't smile easily. He didn't talk much from everything Clara had heard, but when he did speak, people tended to listen, not because he demanded it, but because he had the kind of stillness that made you lean in to catch what he was saying. He owned the Cole Ranch, 6 miles outside town. Best managed operation in the county, everyone agreed. Never borrowed beyond what he could repay. Never lost cattle to disease 2 summers running the way the Whitakers had. Never let a well go dry because he planned his water reserves in early spring. Clara had on more than one occasion read about his property management methods in the agricultural pamphlets the county library carried and thought quietly to herself that Ethan Cole understood land the way she understood numbers honestly, without sentiment, without wishful thinking. She had never spoken to him directly. She watched her father move. Henry Whitaker cut through the gathering with the focused energy of a man who has spotted his only lifeline bobbing in rough water. He reached Ethan Cole before the man had taken 10 steps into the yard. "Cole," Henry said, extending his hand with the expansive warmth of a man performing generosity. "Glad you made it out. Come. I want you to meet my daughter." Ethan shook his hand. "Henry, she's right over here." Henry turned and gestured broadly toward Rosalie, who had been watching her father's approach with an expression Clara recognized the look of a woman who knows exactly what is happening and has not been given any say in it. Henry took Rosalie by the elbow and drew her forward. "This is my Rosalie," Henry said, and his voice had a different quality in it than it ever had when he spoke to Clara, a pride so naked and genuine it landed somewhere in Clara's chest, like a splinter she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing it until moments like this one when it shifted. Rosalie extended her hand. "Mr. Cole?" "Miss Whitaker." Ethan touched the brim of the hat he was holding a courtesy. His eyes moved over Rosalie's face with polite acknowledgement. "Take your time getting acquainted," Henry said with the transparent eagerness of a man engineering something he believed was subtle. "She's a wonderful girl, Wonderful. Keeps the whole household running well, she and her sister both, of course. He waved a vague hand in a direction that was approximately where Clara was standing without actually looking at her. But Rosalie? Now Rosalie is the one with the... Ethan Cole stopped looking at Rosalie. He was looking past her, past Henry, past the gathered circle of neighbors and their watching eyes. He was looking at Clara. Clara went very still. She was standing against the church door with her arms at her sides and flour that she hadn't been able to fully wash off still faint at her wrist, and she was looking back at him because she hadn't expected to be looked at, and so she hadn't had time to arrange her face into the practiced invisible expression she usually wore in public. For a moment, just a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then, Ethan said, quiet enough that only the people nearest him heard it, "Excuse me a moment." He walked away from Henry, away from Rosalie. Through the small parting the crowd made for him, without even being asked to, because that was simply the kind of man Ethan Cole was. In a gathering, people moved aside without quite knowing they were doing it. He walked to the church door. He walked to Clara. Henry Whitaker's face did a complicated thing that Clara caught from 20 feet away. Confusion, then irritation, then the rapid recalculation of a man who doesn't understand what just happened, but is already trying to figure out how to use it. Ethan stopped in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the sun lines at the corners of his eyes. He was looking at her the way she had not been looked at, not like something to be assessed and passed over, not with pity, not with the vague, benevolent non-attention she was accustomed to. He was looking at her the way you look at something you actually see. "Ma'am," he said, "is this seat beside you taken?" There was no seat. They were standing against a church wall, but Clara understood what he was actually asking. "No," she said, "it's not." "Good." He turned and stood beside her facing the crowd, just like that, and the entire churchyard all at once went quiet. The whispers started immediately. Clara could feel them moving through the gathering like a wind through dry grass, fast rustling, carrying sparks. She kept her chin level and her eyes forward and tried to look like a woman who was accustomed to having Ethan Cole stand beside her at church socials, which was one of the more difficult performances of her life. Did he just... He walked right past Rosalie. Why would he? Beside her so quietly, she almost thought she imagined it. Ethan said, "You're Henry Whitaker's daughter." "The other one," Clara said, because that was the phrase she had learned to use before anyone else could use it. First, the way you draw a thorn out yourself, because it hurts less than letting someone else do it. Something moved across Ethan's face. Not pity. Something harder and quieter than pity. "The one who keeps the account books," he said. Clara turned and looked at him fully. "How do you know that?" Reverend Caldwell mentioned it about 6 months back. Said Henry Whitaker's operation should have gone under 2 winters ago, but his daughter kept them above water. Assumed he meant Rosalie. He paused. But Rosalie was standing right there, and she didn't look like a woman who spends much time with account books. Clara said nothing for a moment. "You have a good eye," she said finally. "I pay attention," he said. "It's cheaper than making mistakes." Across the yard, Henry Whitaker was still standing where Ethan had left him. Rosalie at his elbow, his expression cycling through a series of emotions he was too proud to let fully show. Silas Boone had materialized at his side, and the two men were engaged in what appeared to be a quiet and pointed conversation. Clara watched them. "Mr. Boone has been to the property twice this month," she said, not meaning to say it out loud. "I know," Ethan said. She looked at him again. "You do. Boone has a pattern. I've watched him work it on 4 families in the county. He waits until a man is desperate enough to sign anything. Then he offers terms that sound reasonable until you read them carefully." He looked at her. "Have you read them carefully?" "Every line," Clara said. "I know exactly what he has and what he doesn't have, and what he's claiming he has that he actually manufactured out of a misread interest calculation." She stopped. She hadn't meant to say that much to a man she didn't know. Old habit keeping her knowledge quiet, keeping herself small. "I'm sorry. I don't usually speak this way to..." Don't apologize, Ethan said. I asked. She looked at him. I asked, he said again quietly. So answer. It was Rosalie who broke the moment. She appeared at Clara's elbow with the careful composure of a woman managing her feelings through the sheer force of good breeding which Clara had always privately admired her sister for. Clara, Rosalie said, and there was something in her voice that was not the tone she used in public, something private and low and real. Father is asking for you. In a minute. He's asking now. Rosalie glanced at Ethan, then back at her sister, and in that glance Clara caught something she hadn't expected. Not resentment. Not competition. Something closer to relief. Miss Rosalie, Ethan said with a courtesy that was genuine and precise and entirely unromantic. The courtesy of a man acknowledging a young woman without performing interest in her. Rosalie blinked once. Then she nodded. Mr. Cole. And then to Clara. I'll tell him you'll be there shortly. She walked away. Clara exhaled. Your sister doesn't want what your father is offering her, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. No, Clara said. She doesn't, but wanting isn't something our family has spent much time thinking about. She looked down at her hands. The flower was still there at her wrist. She thought about rubbing it away and then decided not to bother. What we want doesn't tend to enter the calculation. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, he said, you have to build the calculation yourself. Then he put his hat back on, tipped it at her, and said, I'll be riding past the Whitaker property Wednesday morning. Something I'd like to look at if you don't object. What would you like to look at? He looked at her steady and clear. The water situation on your south pasture. I think I have a solution. And then he walked away through the crowd which parted for him again, without knowing it was doing so, and Clara stood with her back against the warm church door in the August heat of 1814, with flower on her wrist, and something she hadn't felt in so long, she almost didn't recognize it, moving through her chest. Being seen. Not Rosalie. Not the pretty one her father pushed forward like currency he was trying to spend. Her. Clara May Whitaker, standing in the dust with a breadbasket and an account ledger full of numbers nobody had asked to look at. He had walked straight past all of it, the beauty her family offered the transaction her father was conducting, and stopped in front of her. Behind her, she could hear her father's voice rising, could hear Silas Boone's broad laughter, carrying across the yard, could feel the weight of everything coming that had always been coming. The debt, the pressure, the bargain. Someone was going to try to make with her life, whether she agreed to it or not. But for this one moment, she stood still in the summer dust and let herself feel it. The simple, staggering thing of being the one someone walked toward. She didn't know yet what it would cost her. She didn't know yet what Silas Boone was already planning. She didn't know yet what her father would ask of her before the summer ended. But she knew for the first time in longer than she could remember that she was not invisible. And that knowledge, small and fragile and new as it was going to change everything. Wednesday came, the way summer mornings always came on the Whitaker property, without mercy and without waiting for anyone to be ready for it. Clara was already at the south fence when she heard the horse. She didn't look up right away. She had learned over the years not to interrupt her own work for sounds that usually turned out to be nothing, a loose gate swinging a neighbor's animal wandering where it didn't belong, her father riding out to inspect damage he wouldn't know how to fix. She kept her hands on the wire she was stretching, kept her eyes on the post she was trying to brace, and only turned when the hoofbeats stopped close enough that ignoring them became a choice rather than an oversight. Ethan Cole sat on a dark bay horse at the edge of the fence line, hat pushed back on his head, looking at the south pasture the way a man looks at a problem he has already started solving in his mind. You're early, Clara said. Sun's been up 2 hours, he said. I'd call that late. She almost smiled. She turned back to the fence wire instead. He dismounted without being invited, tied his horse to a post, and walked to where she was working. He didn't offer to take the wire from her. He didn't make the noise men sometimes made, the small performance of stepping in to handle something physical because a woman was doing it. He just crouched beside the post she'd been trying to brace and looked at the ground around it. "Soil's shifted," he said. "You've had this problem since spring, I'd guess." "Since March," she said. "You need to go down another 8 inches on these corner posts. Ground moves differently down here than it does on the high pasture." He looked up at her. "You know that already." "I know that," she said. "I told my father in April." A silence settled between them. Not an uncomfortable one, but the kind that happens between people who understand each other well enough to let a thing be said without pressing it further. Ethan stood and walked along the fence line, and Clara fell into step beside him because that was simply what happened, the natural movement of two people examining the same problem. He pointed out 3 more posts that needed resetting. She showed him where the ground had heaved near the creek bank and taken out 6 feet of wire in a single night back in June. "You fixed that yourself?" he asked. "Father was in town." "Your hands," he said, and his eyes dropped to her palms for just a moment. The old scars from wire worked the fresh scrapes from this morning. He didn't say anything further, but something in his expression tightened briefly, and then he looked away back at the fence. They walked the full length of the south property line before either of them spoke about anything other than the land. It was Clara who said it first, because she had been thinking it since Sunday, and she was not at her core a woman who let things sit unexamined when she could just as easily face them directly. "Why did you come to the fence line, Mr. Cole?" she said, "and not to the house?" He was quiet for a moment. "I came to see the land," he said. "Not your father. My father is the one with the deed. Your father," Ethan said carefully, "is the one with the deed. You're the one who knows what's happening on it." Clara stopped walking. He stopped too and turned to look at her, and she had the same sensation she'd had on Sunday, the disorienting, unfamiliar feeling of someone looking at her directly, without the adjustment that people usually made when they realized they were looking at the wrong Whitaker daughter. "I need to understand something," she said, "because I have spent my whole life in this county, and I am not accustomed to—" She stopped. Started again. "What is it you want, Mr. Cole? Because people don't generally seek me out for a conversation unless they want something from my father, and they've figured out I'm the faster route." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "That's a fair question," he said, "and you deserve a fair answer." He turned and looked out at the pasture. "I want to understand what Boone has against this property, because I've watched him work and I know he doesn't come after a ranch twice in 1 month unless he's decided it's worth having. And the only thing worth having about the Whitaker place from what I can see is the water." Clara felt something shift in her chest, not quite relief, not quite alarm, but something complicated and alert between the two. "The South Creek," she said quietly. "Runs all the way to the valley," Ethan said. "In a dry year, and this is a dry year, and next year looks to be drier, that water access is worth more than the cattle on 10 ranches combined." He paused. "Boone knows that. I suspect you know that too." "I've known it since April," Clara said. "When I looked at his contract and saw the clause about water rights buried in the 3rd page." Ethan turned to look at her sharply. "My father hasn't read it," she said. Her voice was even. She had practiced keeping it even when she talked about these things, because the alternative was something she couldn't afford. He signed what Boone put in front of him, because Boone told him it was a standard loan agreement, and my father wanted to believe that because it was easier than believing the alternative. "Does he know you read it?" "I told him what I found," Clara said. "In April. He told me I was being dramatic. That women read contracts differently than men look for trouble where there isn't any." She paused. "He said Rosalie would never make him feel like a fool over a piece of paper." The last sentence came out quieter than she intended. She heard it leave her mouth and felt the familiar sting of having let something true slip into the open air. Ethan was looking at her again. "You're not dramatic," he said. "And you're not wrong. I've seen Boone use that same clause on the Haskell property and the Mercer land. Same language, different names on the deed." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "This is a copy of the Haskell agreement from 2 years ago. I want you to compare it to whatever Boone gave your father." Clara took the paper. opened it, read the first page in the time it takes most people to read a paragraph. "It's nearly identical," she said. "I know. This language here." She pointed to the third section, her finger tracking the line without touching the ink. "This is how he takes the water without appearing to take it. He frames it as a usage agreement, then defaults the property owner on a technicality and the water rights transfer in the settlement." "Yes," Ethan said. "He's done this before. He's done it 4 times that I know of. The Haskells lost their East Creek. The Mercers signed over their pond access. The Tillman family." He stopped. "They left the county entirely." Clara refolded the paper carefully. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. Inside her chest, something cold and ugly was moving through her. Not fear exactly, but its useful cousin, the one that makes you think fast and move carefully. "My father is going to sign whatever Boone puts in front of him next," she said. "He's going to do it because Boone is going to find the moment when the pressure is highest, probably before the September payment comes due, and he's going to stand in front of my father at the worst possible moment and make it seem like there's only one door." "Then we need to make sure there's another door," Ethan said. Clara looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" "Because Boone is a thief," Ethan said simply. "And I've watched him steal from people who didn't have anyone in their corner, and I'm tired of watching." "That's not a complete answer," Clara said. A beat of silence. "No," he said after a moment. "I reckon it's not." He didn't give her the rest of the answer, but something in the way he looked at her when he said it made her decide for now to let it go. He came back Thursday. He came back Friday. He came back the following Monday with a man from town who knew about water table surveys, and the 3 of them walked the creek bank together for 2 hours, while Clara answered questions the surveyor asked with the calm precision of someone who had been recording creek levels in a notebook every spring since she was 17. The surveyor looked at her twice with the expression of a man recalibrating his expectations. He addressed his questions to Ethan the first time, and to Clara directly every time after that. Henry Whitaker watched from the porch. He didn't come down. On Tuesday evening, Rosalie found Clara at the kitchen table with the account ledger open and the Boone contract spread beside it, a fresh set of pencil calculations running along the margin in Clara's neat small hand. "You haven't been to supper," Rosalie said. "I know." Rosalie pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, not something she typically did when Clara was working. Usually, they moved around each other in the house, the way 2 people move around shared furniture present, but not necessarily together. But Rosalie sat down, folded her hands on the table, and looked at her sister's face. "He's been here every day," Rosalie said. "He's been looking at the land," Clara said, not looking up. "He doesn't look at the land the way a man looks at land he's thinking of buying," Rosalie said. "I know what that looks like. Silas Boone looks at our land that way. Ethan Cole looks at it differently." Clara set down her pencil. Rosalie met her eyes. "He looks at it the way a man looks at something he wants to understand, because understanding it means something to him." She paused. "Because you mean something to him, Clara." "Rosalie, don't." Rosalie's voice was firm in a way Clara rarely heard it. "Don't do that thing where you tell me I'm imagining it. Don't do the thing where you explain very patiently why no one would ever—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less certain. "I have spent my whole life being looked at, Clara. I know the difference between a man who's looking and a man who actually sees something." Clara was quiet. "I also want to tell you something," Rosalie said, "that I should have told you a long time ago." She looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry. For the way things have been in this house. For the way Father treats you. For the way I let it go on without ever saying that it was wrong." The kitchen was very quiet. "You kept us alive," Rosalie said. "Every year, every bad season, every time Father made a decision that should have ruined us, you were the one who found the way through. And no one ever said thank you. And I let that happen because—" She stopped. Because it was easier to be the pretty one everyone praised than to stand next to you and have people compare us and not come out well in the comparison. Clara stared at her sister. "Come out well," she repeated softly. "You're smarter than me," Rosalie said without self-pity, just the flat, clear statement of someone who has done their own accounting. "You're braver than me. You work harder than me. You understand things I don't understand, and you never made me feel stupid for not understanding them." Her voice caught just slightly. "And I let Father treat you like you were less because it meant I wasn't being compared to you. That was selfish, and I am sorry." Clara didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "You're not less than me, Rosalie." "I know that," Rosalie said. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. Neither are you." It was the following Sunday when the first crack appeared in Silas Boone's careful patience. Clara was at the mercantile in town when she heard his voice through the thin wall of the back storage room, speaking to the owner, a man named Garrett, who kept a finger on the county's social pulse, the way a doctor keeps a finger on a pulse constantly for signs of trouble. "Whitaker girl making herself useful to Cole," Boone was saying. "You seen it. The whole county's seen it. A plain woman working her looks on a man of substance. Ought to be embarrassing to her family." "Ethan Cole doesn't strike me as a man who gets worked," Garrett said carefully. "Any man gets worked," Boone said, and his voice had an edge in it that wasn't quite anger, but was what lives just before anger. "Especially when he hasn't got a wife, and a woman makes herself convenient. She's desperate is what she is. Father's drowning, and she's trying to grab hold of the nearest thing that floats." Clara stood very still in the middle of the mercantile, with a bolt of cloth in her hands that she had no memory of picking up. Her face felt hot. Her hands were steady. Inside her chest, something was tightening into a shape she recognized, the small cold knot of shame trying to take hold, the same shame she had spent 25 years fighting off every time she dared to want anything or be seen by anyone. She thought about putting down the cloth and walking out without saying a word. Then she thought about the creek levels she'd recorded for 8 years. The account books with 4 seasons of calculations her father had never looked at. The contract clause she'd found in April that no one had believed her about. She put the cloth down, walked to the doorway of the back room, and said, "Mr. Boone." Both men turned. Silas Boone's expression moved through several things, fast: surprise, irritation, and then the smooth, practiced recovery of a man who is used to controlling every room he enters. "Miss Whitaker," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Didn't see you come in." "No," she said. "I noticed." Garrett made a small motion toward the front of the store, the instinct of a man who does not want to be in the middle of whatever this is. "I want to be clear about something," Clara said. She kept her voice even. She did not raise it. She had learned that quiet was sometimes louder than volume, if you knew how to use it. "Mr. Cole comes to our property because he is examining the water survey on the South Creek. That is a business matter conducted between informed parties who understand the value of what they're looking at." She looked at Boone. "It has nothing to do with desperation. On either side." Boone tilted his head. "I didn't mean any offense, Miss Whitaker. Just making conversation." "You were making a story," Clara said. "There's a difference." She picked up the cloth from the counter. "A story is what you tell people when you want them to think something before they have a chance to find out the truth themselves." Something moved in Boone's expression, then fast, barely visible there and gone. Not anger. Something colder than anger. Recognition. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something that has turned out to be more complicated than he thought it was. "You have a good afternoon, Mr. Boone," Clara said, and walked to the counter to pay for her cloth. She heard him leave through the back. She heard the door close. Her hands, when she set the cloth on the counter, were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from the effort of having held herself so precisely together for so long. Garrett looked at her with something that might have been respect. "That took nerve, Miss Whitaker," he said quietly. "It took practice," she said. and paid for her cloth and left. Ethan heard about it by sundown. Clara didn't know how the county had its ways, its invisible threads of information that ran between porches and church steps and mercantile counters. But he appeared at the Whitaker gate that evening, while she was feeding the chickens, and his expression when he dismounted told her he had heard at least the shape of it, if not every word. "You confronted Boone," he said. "I corrected a misrepresentation," she said, and kept scattering feed. "Clara." It was the first time he had used her given name. She noticed it the way you notice a shift in the temperature suddenly physically. She stopped and looked at him. "He's going to come harder now," Ethan said. "Whatever he was planning, you just told him you're aware of it. He doesn't like being aware of." "I know," she said. "He'll go to your father." "I know that too. Your father may not—" He stopped, chose his words. "Your father may not take your side of it." The chickens moved around her feet. The evening was settling into that particular amber light that came at the end of August days, warm and slanted and temporary. "My father," Clara said, "has not taken my side of anything in as long as I can remember." She said it without bitterness. That was the honest truth of it, not a wound she was nursing, but a fact she had incorporated into her understanding of the world, like the water table, and the price of winter feed, and the dates payments came due. "That's not going to change because I need it to." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Then we need to move faster," he said. "I have someone in Richmond, a legal man handles land contract disputes. I've already written to him. But I need your account books, Clara. The full records. Everything you've kept." She looked at him. "That's 4 ledger books." "I know. They cover 8 years. I need all of it. If my father finds out I've taken them off the property—" "He won't," Ethan said. "Not if we're careful." She was quiet for a long moment. The chickens had finished their feed and were settling into their nighttime movements around the yard. Somewhere behind the house a door opened, her father coming onto the porch. Clara and Ethan both heard it. Neither of them moved. "All right," Clara said quietly, her eyes still on the chicken yard. "I'll get them." "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Fence line again." "I'll be there before you," she said. He almost smiled. It was the particular expression of a man who believes you. He mounted his horse and rode out through the gate, and Clara stood in the evening with the empty feed pail in her hand, and the amber light fading around her, and the sound of her father's boots on the porch boards overhead, not knowing what she was doing or what it would cost. Knowing only that, for the first time in 8 years of keeping numbers and fixing fences and reading contracts that no one believed her about, someone was asking her to bring everything she knew into the open, and she was not going to waste that. She found the note from Boone the next morning. It had been slid under the kitchen door sometime in the night, a folded piece of paper with no envelope, the writing on it quick and firm and without preamble. "Miss Whitaker, I believe we have some things to discuss. I'll be calling on your father Thursday next. I suggest you be present. S. Boone." She read it twice. Then she folded it, put it in her apron pocket, picked up 3 of the 4 ledger books from the cabinet under the stairs where she kept them, and walked to the south fence line in the early morning light. Ethan was already there. She held out the note first. He read it without expression. "Thursday," he said. "That gives us 9 days," she said. "It's enough," he said. Though something in his voice told her he wasn't entirely certain, and she appreciated the slight uncertainty, because it meant he wasn't telling her easy things, she handed him the ledgers. He took them with both hands, the way you take something that matters. He looked at the worn covers, the pencil marks on the spines she used to tell the seasons apart, the small, careful system she'd built over 8 years, so that the truth of the Whitaker property existed somewhere in writing, even if no one asked to read it. "You kept all of this," he said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Someone had to," she said. He looked up at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the morning was very bright and very still, and the creek moved in the background, and somewhere down the pasture one of the cattle made a low sound in the heat. "What you've done here," Ethan said carefully. "With these books, The records, all of it. Most men I know couldn't have managed it. Most men wouldn't have thought to." "Then they were thinking about the wrong things," Clara said. "Yes," he said. "They were." He held her gaze for one long moment. Then he tucked the ledgers under his arm and said, "9 days, Clara. We'll be ready." She watched him ride out. Watched the dust settle after the horse's hooves. Watched the morning light move along the fence line she had repaired with her own hands, and the creek bank she had surveyed on her own knees, and the pasture she had kept alive for 8 years through dry summers and bad decisions, and the slow grinding weight of being the daughter that nobody saw. Down the hill she heard her father come outside and call her name, the way he always called it, brisk and practical, a summons, not a greeting. She turned and walked back to the house. She was going to be ready. She was already ready. But there was something new in her chest now as she walked, not just the cold, useful alertness of a woman who has been managing a crisis alone for 8 years. Something warmer than that. Something that had started on Sunday, when a man walked across a churchyard and stood beside her, and had been growing quietly ever since, the way water gathers underground before it finds a way to rise. She was not going to let Silas Boone have this land. She was not going to let her father trade her life for a debt settlement. And for the first time, standing in the summer dust of the Whitaker property on a bright August morning, with 9 days to Thursday and 4 ledger books in the hands of a man who had asked to read them. Clara. May Whitaker felt something that was not patience or endurance, or the quiet suffering of a woman who has learned to want less. She felt like she was about to fight, and she had been waiting her whole life for that particular feeling. It was Rosalie 2 days later who told her what the town was saying. They were on the porch in the evening, the heat finally backing off enough to breathe, and Rosalie had the careful expression of a woman delivering information she has been holding for longer than was comfortable. Mabel Garrett told Martha Cruz, Rosalie said without leading up to it, that Silas Boone has been telling people you fabricated the ledger records, that you altered them to make father look incompetent and make yourself look necessary. Clara set down her mending. He's telling people, Rosalie continued, that you've been influencing Ethan Cole with false information, that you exaggerated the water situation to make yourself seem valuable. She paused. And that Ethan is being deceived by a desperate woman who needed a man to save her family and manufactured a crisis to make that happen. The porch was quiet. He's trying to discredit the records, Clara said. He's trying to discredit you, Rosalie said, before Thursday, before anyone has a chance to look at what you've actually documented. Does father know what Boone is saying in town? Rosalie's expression answered her before her words did. He heard some of it, Rosalie said quietly. From Boone directly, I think. He came home from town yesterday looking... She stopped. He didn't say anything to you, I know, but he looked at you at supper, Clara. He looked at you like he was trying to decide something. What kind of something? Rosalie pressed her lips together. The kind of something a man decides when he has to choose between believing his daughter and believing the story that makes things easier for him. Clara stared at the darkening yard. He's going to side with Boone, she said. I don't know that. I do, Clara said. Quiet, certain. The way you are certain about creek levels and interest calculations and the date payments come due because you have been watching the numbers long enough to see where they go. Her father was going to choose the easier story. He had always chosen the easier story. And the easier story this summer was the one where Clara's records were not to be trusted, where Ethan Cole had been misled, where Silas Boone was a reasonable businessman, offering reasonable terms to a family in a difficult season. The easier story was the one where Clara was the problem. She picked up her mending and set it aside and stood up. Rosalie, she said. Yes. I need you to do something for me, and I need you not to tell father. Rosalie looked at her sister in the fading light and said without hesitation, Tell me what? And Clara told her. Because the one thing Silas Boone had not planned for in all his careful engineering of this situation was that the rejected daughter and the beautiful daughter had stopped being on opposite sides. They were on the same side now. And that Clara thought that was going to be the thing he hadn't seen coming. Rosalie did not ask questions when Clara laid out what she needed. She sat on the edge of the porch in the darkening evening and listened with the focused stillness of a woman who has been decorative her whole life and has finally found something useful to do with herself. Clara needed access to the Garrett Mercantile's back records, the ledger Garrett kept of credit extended to county residents, which Boone had been using to track which families were most vulnerable. Rosalie knew Mabel Garrett the way all young women in a small county know each other through church and social calls, and the particular intimacy of having grown up within 5 miles of the same steeple. She could ask to see it without raising suspicion. Clara, who Boone had now publicly framed as a woman with an agenda, could not. "He keeps credit records going back 6 years, Clara said. "I need to see which families Boone has settled debts with and when and under what stated terms." "You think there's a pattern?" "I know there's a pattern. I need it in writing." Rosalie nodded. "I'll go to Mabel tomorrow morning. I'll tell her I'm trying to understand the family accounts." She paused. "Which isn't even a lie." "No," Clara said, "it isn't." They sat together in the dark for a while, the two of them not speaking, which was itself something new. They had lived in the same house for 25 years, and Clara could count on one hand the number of times they had sat together in silence, and had it feel like company rather than distance. "Clara," Rosalie said finally. "Are you frightened?" Clara thought about it honestly because Rosalie deserved an honest answer, and because she had spent enough of her life giving people the answer they wanted instead of the true one. "Yes," she said. "But it's the kind of frightened that makes you move, not the kind that makes you stop." Rosalie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good, that's the right kind." The next morning, Henry Whitaker came into the kitchen before Clara had finished her coffee and sat down across from her at the table, with the expression of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say and is still not confident in it. She waited. "Boone stopped by yesterday," he said, "while you were at the fence." "I know," she said. "Rosalie told me." Henry's jaw tightened slightly. "He had some concerns about the ledger books, about what you've been sharing with Cole. I shared accurate records of this property's finances with a man who is trying to help us," Clara said. "There's nothing in those books that isn't true. He says you may have adjusted things to make the situation look worse than it is." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara set down her coffee cup with great care, because the alternative was something that would not help anyone. "Father," she said, and her voice was very steady, "I have kept those records since I was 17 years old. Every number in them is real. Every calculation is accurate. I have never once written anything in those books that wasn't true, because the whole point of keeping them was so that someone someday would know exactly what this property is worth and exactly what we owe." She looked at him. "I kept them for you, so you would have something to stand on when someone tried to take what's ours." Henry looked at the table. "Boone says Cole has gotten the wrong impression of things," he said. "Says it might be better if Cole stepped back from the property for a while, until things are settled." "Settled?" Clara repeated. "You mean until you've signed whatever he puts in front of you on Thursday?" "Clara, what is he offering you, Father?" She kept her voice even. "What did he say in exchange for asking Ethan Cole to leave?" Henry said nothing. "He offered to restructure the debt," Clara said, and she was guessing. But she was guessing from 8 years of watching her father make decisions, and she was not guessing wrong. She could see it in his face. "He offered you better terms, didn't he? Better terms in exchange for cutting off the one person who's been looking into his contracts." Henry's silence was its own answer. "Those terms will have conditions," Clara said. "They always do. Read the paper before you sign it, Father. Read every line. Read the parts that don't look important. That's where it is." "You don't need to tell me how to read a contract," Henry said, and his voice had the particular stiffness of a man whose pride has been touched in a place that still has feeling. "Someone does," Clara said. "Not cruelly, just truly." Henry stood up from the table. He stood there for a moment, not looking at her, and Clara thought she saw something move across his face, something that might have been shame or might have been the shadow of it, which is as close as some men get. "Thursday," he said. "We'll get it all sorted out Thursday." He left the kitchen. Clara sat alone at the table and breathed. 9 days had become 2. Whatever Ethan had been building with the ledger books and the letter to Richmond, it needed to be ready. She pushed back her chair, walked to the yard, and stood in the morning heat thinking about the fastest route to the Cole property that didn't go through town. She had never ridden to Ethan Cole's ranch uninvited. She saddled the horse and went anyway. He was in the cattle yard when she rode in talking to a hand about a fence repair, and he turned when he heard the horse, and his expression changed in the single second between recognizing the horse and recognizing who was riding it. Something sharpened in his face, the way a man's attention sharpens when something he cares about has arrived unexpectedly. "Boone moved the meeting," she said before she was fully dismounted. "Thursday, 2 days." Ethan said something quiet to the hand who walked away without comment. "Come inside," Ethan said. The Cole kitchen was plain and clean, and nothing like the Whitaker house. It had the spare functional quality of a place kept by a man who valued order, not for appearance, but because disorder cost time. There was a table with papers on it, and Clara recognized her own ledger books stacked to one side, and beside them a series of handwritten notes in a script she didn't know. "Richmond?" she asked. "Arrived yesterday. My man there found 3 more families Boone settled with in the last 4 years. All of them signed water rights agreements buried in debt restructuring contracts. All of them defaulted on manufactured technicalities." He put his hand on the stack of notes. He also found that Boone's original lending license was issued under a different business name, which means every contract he's written under his current name has a chain of title problem. Clara stared at him. "That makes the contracts voidable." "Potentially. A judge would have to agree. But it gives us standing." "It gives us an argument," he said. "Yes." She pulled out the chair at the table and sat down without being asked, spreading the notes out in front of her, reading fast. Ethan sat across from her and let her read. He didn't interrupt. He didn't explain things she hadn't asked him to explain. He understood already that she didn't need things explained. She needed space to think, and he gave it to her the same way he gave her space at the fence line, naturally, without ceremony. "There's a problem," she said after 5 minutes. "Tell me." "If my father signs the new agreement Thursday before we can get this to a legal authority, Boone will argue the new contract supersedes the old dispute. He'll say the parties reached a voluntary resolution." She looked up. "He's done this before. The Haskell family, they had a challenge ready, and Boone got to the father 2 days early with a new offer, and the father signed, and the challenge died because there was nothing left to challenge." Ethan looked at her steadily. "So we need to get to your father before Thursday." "I tried this morning." The words came out flat and careful, and she watched his face absorb them. "He's not listening," Ethan said. "He is listening," Clara said. "He's listening to Boone, because Boone is offering him a way to believe that everything is fine, and I am offering him the truth, and the truth is harder to hold." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if it's not you who talks to him?" Clara looked up. "Your father doesn't hear you." Ethan said, not cruelly, just plainly, the same way he talked about soil composition and water tables. "It's not because you're wrong. It's because he has spent so long deciding what you are to him that he can't hear what you're actually saying, but he might hear someone else say the same thing." He met her eyes. "Let me talk to him. He'll think you're interfering, maybe, but I'm also the man he was trying to impress at the church social 2 weeks ago. That counts for something in the way your father calculates things." Clara hated that he was right. She hated it the way you hate the accurate diagnosis of a disease, not because it's wrong, but because it means the condition is real. "When?" she said. "Tonight," Ethan said. "Before he has more time to talk himself into whatever Boone told him." She nodded. He stood and reached for his hat and then stopped. "Clara." She looked up. "You have more right to this fight than anyone," he said. "I'm not replacing you in it. I'm just going through a door you're not supposed to use yet. That's all." "I know," she said. "But you'll be at Thursday's meeting." "I will absolutely be at Thursday's meeting," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one, the thing that lives just before a smile in a face that doesn't make them easily. "Good," he said. "I'm counting on it." He went to the Whitaker house that evening. Clara did not go with him. She stayed at her own kitchen table with the Richmond notes spread in front of her, and her pencil moving, and tried not to think about what was happening a quarter-mile down the road. Rosalie came back from the Garretts at dusk with flushed cheeks and a piece of paper folded in her hand. "I have it," she said, breathless from hurrying. "Mabel let me look at the full credit ledger. I wrote down every name Boone has settled with and the date and the amount. Clara." She set the paper on the table. "There are 9 families." Clara unfolded the paper and read it. 9 families, 6 years. The dates ran in a pattern so clear it was almost like Boone had drawn a map. He moved on a new target every 8 months, roughly always in the dry season, always after a bad cattle year, when desperation was highest and judgment was thinnest. The Whitakers were the 10th. "Does it help?" Rosalie asked. "It helps," Clara said. "It shows a deliberate pattern. A court would have a hard time calling this a series of coincidences." She looked at her sister. "This was good work, Rosalie." Rosalie sat down a little shaky with the aftermath of doing something frightening. "I've never done anything like that before. Asked for something without having a social reason for it." "How did it feel?" Rosalie thought about it. "Terrifying," she said. "And then good. Like something I'd been waiting to do without knowing I was waiting." Clara nodded. "That feeling," she said, "doesn't go away." They were still at the table, Rosalie with her tea and Clara with her pencil, when they heard the sound of a horse coming up the road. 2 horses. Clara's head came up. She was at the door before the knock came. Ethan stood on the porch. Behind him at the gate, her father stood in the dark, with an expression she had not seen on his face in years, something stripped of its usual performance, something raw and tired and ashamed. "He wants to talk to you," Ethan said quietly. Clara looked past him at her father. Henry Whitaker took his hat off. He held it in his hands the way men hold their hats when they have run out of other things to hold. "Clara," he said. And then he stopped, because whatever he had planned to say appeared to be harder to say than he'd expected. She stepped off the porch and walked to him. "The records," Henry said. "Cole showed me." He stopped. "He showed me what you found, what you've been keeping, all these years." His voice had something in it she couldn't quite name. Not quite remorse, not quite pride. Something uncertain, and between the two. "I didn't know it was this bad with Boone. I didn't know he'd done it to so many." "I told you in April," Clara said quietly. "I know." He looked at the hat in his hands. "I know you did." The night was warm and still around them. Somewhere down the pasture, a cattle noise low and distant. "I need you to not sign anything Thursday," Clara said. "Whatever he brings, whatever he offers, whatever it sounds like, don't sign it." Cole said the same. "Cole is right." Henry was quiet. Then, "What do you need from me?" Clara looked at him for a long moment, at the tired face of a man who had been making wrong choices for years, out of fear and pride and the deep human desire to take the easier path, and who was standing in front of her, now asking what she needed in a voice that sounded for the first time she could remember like he actually meant the question. "Just let me handle Thursday," she said. "That's all. Let me handle it." He nodded. Once. Slowly. It was not an apology. It was not the undoing of 25 years. But it was a door opening where there had been a wall, and Clara, who had spent her whole life being practical about what was actually available to her, took it for what it was worth. Thursday arrived the way trouble always arrives, right on time, and finding you only half ready for it. Clara had been up before dawn. She had the ledger books in her arms and the Richmond notes folded in her pocket, and Rosalie's list of 9 families tucked into the back cover of the 4th ledger. She had read everything twice the night before, and once more that morning, not because she didn't know it, but because knowing it and being able to speak it clearly under pressure were 2 different skills, and she had been practicing the second one. Ethan arrived at 8. He had brought a man with him not from Richmond but from the county seat, a man named Aldrich, who wore a plain coat and had the careful, unhurried eyes of someone who spent a great deal of time reading documents other people wished hadn't been read. "He's a magistrate's clerk," Ethan said quietly at the door before Henry could hear. "Not a judge, but he can take sworn statements. And if he takes sworn statements today about Boone's contracts, those statements become part of a formal record." "Can he compel Boone to answer?" "Not today, but Boone won't know that." Clara looked at the clerk. He gave her a small professional nod. "All right," she said, and opened the door wider to let them in. Silas Boone arrived at 9. He came alone, which Clara had not expected. She had expected at least one man with him, someone to hold papers or provide the social mass of an ally. But he came to the Whitaker door, alone, coat buttoned, despite the heat carrying a leather satchel, with the satisfied bearing of a man who considers the matter already decided. He saw Ethan first. His expression did something complicated and fast. Then he saw Aldrich, and something behind his eyes went very still. "Henry," Boone said, recovering fast, addressing himself entirely to Clara's father. "Wasn't expecting a crowd." "Come in, Silas," Henry said. His voice was flat and steady, and Clara heard in it with some surprise a firmness she hadn't heard her father use in a long time. They sat at the long kitchen table. Boone set his satchel on the surface between them. He did not look at Clara directly. He had arranged himself physically so that she was behind his eyeline, the way you arrange furniture present but out of the focal point. "I've prepared a restructured agreement," Boone said to Henry, opening the satchel. "Simpler terms. I think you'll find it generous given the circumstances." "I'd like to see it," Henry said. "Of course." Boone slid the papers across the table. Clara reached past her father and picked them up. Boone looked at her for the first time since he'd entered. "Miss Whitaker, I don't think—" "My daughter reads contracts for this family," Henry said. The sentence landed in the room like something dropped from a height. "She has for years. I should have said so sooner." Boone's mouth closed. Clara read the document. It took her 4 minutes. The room was silent except for the sound of paper and outside the summer heat pressing against the walls. Rosalie stood at the kitchen doorway. Ethan sat at the far end of the table, still and watchful. Aldrich had his own paper out and his pen uncapped. On page 3, Clara found it. Of course she found it. She had known it would be there, had known exactly what shape it would take, because Boone was not, for all his confidence, an original man. He used the same tools because they had worked before. The clause was buried in a paragraph about payment scheduling 2 sentences that would, on default of any payment, transfer water access rights and grazing easements to the second party in perpetuity. "Page 3, Clara said, setting the paper flat on the table so the whole room could see it. She pointed to the clause. This language, combined with the manufactured default structure in sections 5 and 7, means that within 18 months, regardless of whether you make every payment, you will have signed away the water rights on the South Creek. She looked up at Boone. You know this, because it's the same language you used on the Haskell Agreement in 1811, and the Mercer Agreement in 1812, and the Tillman family, and the Boyds, and 6 other families in this county over the last 6 years. The room had gone very quiet. That's a serious accusation, Boone said. His voice was controlled. Careful. It's a documented fact, Clara said. She opened the 4th ledger book and took out Rosalie's list. She set it on the table. 9 families. Dates, amounts, settlement terms. Taken from the county credit records. She took out the Richmond notes next. Your original lending license was issued under the name Boone and Hartwell Associates. Your current contracts are issued under S. Boone Properties. The chain of title on your lending authority is broken. Every contract you have written in this county in the last 5 years is potentially voidable. Boone's face had gone through several things. He had arrived at a careful blankness which was the most dangerous expression Clara had ever seen on a man. The expression that meant he was not giving up. He was regrouping. "This is—" he started. "Mr. Aldrich," Ethan said from the far end of the table. The clerk looked up. "Would you be willing to begin taking statements?" Ethan said. Aldrich uncapped his pen with the precise, unhurried motion of a man who has done this before. "I would." Boone stood up. "I don't think," he said, and his voice had a new quality in it. Not anger, but its harder edge. The thing anger becomes when it has resources, that you understand what you're starting here, Miss Whitaker. "I understand exactly what I'm starting," Clara said. She stood too, because she was not going to have this conversation with him looking down at her. "I've understood it since April. Since I read your contract the first time and told my father what it meant, and was told I was being dramatic." "You are being dramatic," Boone said. "You are a woman who has convinced herself she understands things she doesn't, who has involved herself in a business matter that is between me and your father, and who has enlisted a man who is clearly—" He looked at Ethan, not thinking clearly to support a version of events that suits her purposes. The room was very still. Clara heard her own breathing. She heard Rosalie at the doorway shift her weight. She heard her father beside her make a sound that might have been the beginning of a word. Then she heard her own voice, and it was steadier than she had ever heard it, steadier than she had known she was capable of, calm and clear, and carrying to every corner of the kitchen with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't require volume because it doesn't require anyone's permission. "I am not a woman who has convinced herself of something," she said. "I am a woman who kept 8 years of accurate records for a family that didn't value her doing it. I am a woman who read your contracts when no one asked me to, and found what you'd buried in them, and told the truth about it, and was called dramatic, and difficult, and wrong by every person in this room who had the power to listen." She did not look away from him. "You built your business on the certainty that women like me don't get taken seriously, that our work goes unread, and our voices go unheard. And by the time anyone looks closely enough to see what we've documented, you've already gotten what you came for." She put her hand flat on the ledger books. "You miscalculated," she said, "because someone looked closely. And now, what I documented is going to be part of a formal legal record, and the 9 families you have already taken from are going to have a chance to stand up alongside their own evidence, and you are going to have to explain in front of a magistrate why your business name changed and your contracts didn't." Boone looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, the mask was down. She saw what was underneath it, not fear exactly, but its functional equivalent, the cold recognition of a man who has encountered an obstacle he did not plan for and is calculating the cost of what comes next. Then Henry Whitaker, who had been sitting very still and very quiet for the last 5 minutes, said, "Silas, you'd better go." Boone looked at Henry. Henry's face had the look of a man who has just finished carrying something very heavy and set it down and can feel the absence of it in his arms. "We're done here," Henry said. "Take your papers. Get off my property." Boone picked up his satchel. He looked at Clara one more time with the expression of a man who is filing something away, recalculating, deciding on the next approach, rather than conceding the field. "This isn't finished," he said quietly. "No," Clara said. "It isn't, because we haven't started yet." He left. The sound of the front door closing behind him seemed to take up the whole room for a moment. Then Ethan exhaled slowly and looked across the table at Clara, and what was in his face was something Clara had no immediate word for. It wasn't admiration exactly, though it was that too. It was something more specific, the expression of someone watching a person do exactly what they were built to do, and feeling in that, watching something close to reverence. Henry Whitaker set his hat down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the wood, and looked at his hands for a long time. "Clara," he said finally without looking up. His voice was rougher than usual. "I owe you." He stopped. "I owe you more than I know how to say right now." Clara looked at her father's bent head, at the gray in his hair, and the shake in his hands that hadn't been there 3 years ago, and she felt something complicated and old and not quite resolved move through her chest. "You can start," she said quietly, "by signing nothing. Not today. Not until we have a legal opinion on every contract Boone has against this family." "Yes," Henry said. "All right." Aldrich was already writing. Rosalie had moved fully into the kitchen and was standing beside Clara, close enough that their arms almost touched, and there was something in that proximity that was new and steadying and real. Ethan caught Clara's eye across the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. But what was in his face when he looked at her, that quiet, certain, unhurried thing, landed somewhere deep and warm in Clara's chest and stayed there. Outside, the summer heat pressed on. The cattle moved in the pasture. The South Creek ran on toward the valley, the way it always had, the way it would keep running, because it was theirs, and she had known it was theirs, and she had been right about that the whole time. She had been right about all of it, and the county, slow as it was about to find out. Aldrich stayed for 3 hours. He sat at the Whitaker kitchen table, with his pen moving steadily, and his face giving nothing away, the way a man's face looks when he has been doing careful work for so long that careful work has become his natural expression. He took Henry's statement first, what Boone had said, what he had offered, what he had implied about the consequences of refusal. Then he took Clara's, which was longer, more detailed, and referenced specific page numbers and clause language from memory, with the precision of someone who had been living inside those documents for months. When Aldrich asked her how long she had been keeping the property records, and she said 8 years, he looked up from his paper for the first time since he'd started writing. 8 years, he repeated. "Since I was 17, Clara said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating something important. Then he wrote it down and went back to his paper, and Ethan gave his statement last. He laid out what he knew about Boone's history in the county, the Haskell property, the Mercers, the Tillman family, who had left entirely with the calm, factual delivery of someone who has been building a case quietly for a long time and is finally in a room where it matters. When Aldrich finally capped his pen, he looked around the table. "I want to be clear about what I can and cannot do," he said. "I can carry these statements to the magistrate's office in the county seat. I can flag the chain of title issue on Boone's lending license. What happens after that is not in my hands." He paused. "But I'll tell you this, in 12 years of taking statements for the magistrate's office, I have not seen documentation this thorough presented in a private setting." He looked at Clara. "Miss Whitaker, your records are going to matter. I want you to understand that." Clara nodded. She did not let herself feel it fully yet, because Boone was still out there, and the fight was not over, and she had learned long ago that relief taken too early has a way of leaving you unprepared. After Aldrich left with Ethan, who rode with him to the edge of the county road, Clara and Rosalie and Henry sat in the kitchen, in a silence that had a different quality than the silences that had filled that room for years. Those silences had been the kind that accumulate from things left unsaid. This one was emptier, cleaner. The silence after something has finally been spoken. Henry was the one who broke it. "Rosalie," he said, and his voice had a quality in it that made both daughters go still. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Rosalie looked at him. "Have you been happy?" Henry asked. "These last years, with the way I've been, with the plans I've made for you?" The kitchen was very quiet. Rosalie set her teacup down slowly. She was the kind of woman who had been managing other people's emotions for so long that her first instinct in any difficult conversation was to soften the truth into something easier to hold. Clara watched her sister decide visibly not to do that. "No, Father," Rosalie said. "I haven't been." Henry looked at the table. "I've been admired," Rosalie said, "for as long as I can remember. And I know you meant that as a gift. I know you were proud of it. But being admired for how you look is not the same as being known for who you are. And I have spent my whole life being admired by people who did not know me at all." She paused. "And some of them men, you encouraged men, you invited to Sunday supper and church socials, and pushed toward me with that smile you have when you're hoping something will take some of them frightened me. And I smiled anyway, because that was what was expected. Henry made a sound that was low and rough and not quite a word. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," Rosalie said. "I'm telling you because you asked for the truth, and I think for the first time in a long time, you actually mean it." Henry looked up at his younger daughter, and what was on his face was grief, not the performed grief of a man making a public show of contrition, but the quiet, private grief of someone confronting what they have done without the protection of an excuse. "And Clara," he said, turning to his older daughter. His voice was unsteady now, in a way she had never heard. "What I've done to you, what I've let happen. You kept this family above water for 8 years, and I thanked Rosalie for meals she didn't cook, and praised her for land she didn't work, and I let you stand in the doorway of the church social carrying a bread basket like you were the help." He stopped. "I am ashamed of myself." Clara looked at her father. She had been waiting in some part of herself she had kept very quiet for a version of this moment for a long time. She had imagined it would feel like triumph or vindication, or at minimum the satisfaction of being acknowledged by someone whose acknowledgement had been withheld for years. What she actually felt was something more complicated and more human than any of those things. She felt tired. She felt something loosen in her chest that had been pulled tight for so long she'd stopped noticing the tension. She felt not forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness was a process and not a moment, but the beginning of it, the door to it unlocked. "You can't give me those years back," she said. "I'm not asking you to. What I'm asking is that you don't waste what's in front of us now." She looked at him steadily. "Let me help you properly. Not quietly in the background while someone else gets the credit. Actually help you openly with your full understanding that I know what I'm doing." Henry Whitaker nodded. It was a slow, deliberate nod, the nod of a man making a commitment, not just a gesture. "Yes," he said. "That's what I want." And Clara, for the first time in 8 years of keeping accounts that nobody read, believed her father when he said something. The county moved faster than Clara expected. Within a week of Aldrich's visit, word had spread not through gossip this time, but through the deliberate, purposeful telling of people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. The Haskell family came forward first. James Haskell rode to the Whitaker property on a Monday morning and stood in the yard turning his hat in his hands and told Clara and Ethan that he had been trying to challenge Boone's water agreement for 2 years, but hadn't known where to start. "We have a start now," Ethan told him. "We have documentation, and we have a legal record, and we have your testimony alongside 9 others. What we need is for you to put your name on a sworn statement." Haskell looked at him. Then he looked at Clara. Something shifted in his face, the recognition of a man who has been isolated with a problem and has just realized he isn't alone with it anymore. "Tell me where to sign," he said. The Mercers came the next day. The Boyd family sent their eldest son on Wednesday with a letter from his parents, and a second letter from the neighboring Crane family, who had heard through the Boyd son that something was finally happening. By the end of the second week, there were 7 families with sworn statements in Aldrich's file at the county seat. Boone was not standing still through any of this. Clara knew he wouldn't. She had watched him long enough to know that he was a man who responded to threat by applying more pressure, not by backing away from it. The question was not whether he would push back, but where and how. The where turned out to be the church. Reverend Caldwell held a Sunday service 2 weeks after Thursday's meeting, at which Silas Boone sat in the front pew in his expensive coat and waited until after the service to pull the Reverend aside. Clara was still in the churchyard talking with Martha Haskell when she saw it happen. She watched Boone's hand on the Reverend's arm, the bent heads, the Reverend's face going through something she couldn't read from 30 yards. She found out what was said 3 hours later when the Reverend's wife came to the Whitaker door. "He told my husband," Mrs. Caldwell said without preamble, standing on the porch, with her hands clasped and her expression the careful neutral of a woman delivering news she doesn't want to be the messenger of, "that if the church continued to, in his words, allow itself to be used as a social platform for a campaign against legitimate business, he would withdraw his annual donation to the building fund. She paused. He also implied that your character was in question, yours and Mr. Cole's. That there was something improper about the nature of your collaboration. Clara looked at her. What did the Reverend say? He said he would think on it. Mrs. Caldwell's expression shifted slightly. I told him there was nothing to think on. I told him that I have known you since you were a child, and I know exactly what kind of woman you are, and that any man who uses money to silence a congregation is a man whose money the congregation doesn't want. She squared her shoulders. He agreed, eventually. Clara was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Mrs. Caldwell said. I've watched that man undervalue you for 25 years and I never said anything. I owe you more than one conversation with my husband. She left. Clara stood on the porch and felt the county shifting around her. Not all at once, not completely, but in the incremental way that real things change one conversation and one decision and one person at a time. The twist came from a direction Clara had not anticipated. She was at the Cole Ranch on a Thursday afternoon working through the legal documents with Ethan and a letter from the Richmond contact that had arrived that morning when Ethan's ranch hand came to the door and said there was a woman at the gate. They looked at each other. I'm not expecting anyone, Ethan said. The woman at the gate was not from Harlan County. She was perhaps 40, well-dressed in a practical way, with the bearing of someone accustomed to conducting business rather than watching it be conducted on her behalf. She introduced herself as Catherine Hartwell. She paused after the name, watching their faces for recognition. Clara felt it first. Hartwell, she said. As in Boone and Hartwell Associates. The woman's expression confirmed it before she spoke. His former business partner, she said. We dissolved the partnership in 1809. I have been trying to extricate myself from the legal consequences of his practices ever since. She looked at Clara steadily. I heard what you've been doing. The statements, the records, the chain of title challenge. I have documents from the original partnership that I believe would be significant to your case. Clara and Ethan looked at each other. Come in, Clara said. Catherine Hartwell sat at the same kitchen table where Aldrich had taken statements and laid out a leather document case that was thick with papers. What she had was the original Boone and Hartwell partnership ledger, the one that showed every transaction Boone had conducted under the partnership name before he quietly dissolved the business, kept the assets, and re-registered under his sole name. He owed me 40% of the portfolio when we dissolved, Catherine said. He gave me 18 and told me the rest was losses. I never believed him. I've been collecting evidence ever since. She looked at Clara. What you found with the chain of title, the lending license, that's the piece I was missing. I had the financial fraud. You have the legal mechanism to void the contracts. Together, we have both sides of it, Clara said. Yes, Catherine said. Ethan leaned back in his chair slowly. He was looking at Catherine Hartwell with the expression of a man who has just watched an equation resolve itself. How did you find out about what we were doing? Aldrich's clerk is my cousin's husband, Catherine said with the slight smile of a woman who has been operating in networks that men don't always know exist. Women talk Mr. Cole, especially when they have something worth saying. Clara felt something move through her that was close to laughter, but deeper than that, something warm and fierce and expansive. She looked at the document case on the table, at the years of careful, solitary record-keeping that Catherine Hartwell had done in her own way, and for her own reasons, and she thought about herself at 17, opening the first ledger book with a fresh pencil, deciding that the truth was worth writing down, even if nobody read it. They had both been doing the same thing. Waiting for the moment when it mattered. This changes everything, Ethan said, and he was looking at Clara when he said it, not at Catherine. It changes the scope of it, Clara said. It's not just Harlan County now. It's the whole lending record going back to the partnership. That's a state-level matter. Yes, Catherine said. Which means it goes above the county magistrate, significantly above. The three of them sat with that for a moment. Then Clara pulled a piece of paper toward her and picked up her pencil and said, "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning of the partnership." Catherine Hartwell looked at her, the look of one careful, solitary, underestimated woman recognizing another. "Gladly," she said. Silas Boone came to the Whitaker property one more time. It was an evening in early September, the heat finally beginning to break into something that felt like the beginning of a season changed the air, carrying the first thin suggestion of autumn underneath the warmth. Clara was on the porch when she heard the horse, and she knew before she saw him that it was him, because Boone's horse had a particular sound to its gait that she had learned to recognize over the summer, the way you learn to recognize a sound that means trouble is coming. He stopped at the gate. He didn't open it. He sat on his horse and looked at the house. Henry came out of the door behind Clara. Rosalie appeared at the window. "Whitaker," Boone called, and his voice was different than it had been in the kitchen on Thursday, tighter stripped of the easy authority it usually carried. "I'd like a word." "I don't think we have anything to say to each other," Henry said. "I have an offer," Boone said. "A final one. Drop the statements. Drop the licensing challenge, and I'll forgive the debt entirely. Clean slate. You keep the land. You keep the water rights, and we're done." Henry looked at Clara. Clara looked at Boone. She walked down the porch steps and across the yard to the gate, so that she was close enough to speak at a normal volume and he would hear every word. "I want to make sure I understand you," she said. "You want us to pull our legal challenge, withdraw the sworn statements that 7 families have signed, and stop cooperating with the magistrate's office investigation in exchange for you forgiving a debt that you manufactured through fraudulent contract terms and a lending license you had no legal right to issue." Boone's jaw was tight. "I'm offering a resolution." "You're offering silence," Clara said. "You've offered that before to other people in other forms. It didn't work then either." She kept her voice level. "The chain of title challenge doesn't belong to us anymore. It's in the hands of the magistrate's office, and it involves a state-level review of your lending history going back to the original partnership. We cannot withdraw it, and even if we could, we wouldn't." Boone looked at her for a long time. "You're going to make an enemy," he said, low, careful. "You were already an enemy," Clara said. "You just thought I was too small to notice." The silence between them was the silence of 2 people who have finished negotiating and both know it. Boone pulled his horse around without another word and rode out. Henry came to stand beside Clara at the gate. They watched the road until the sound of the horse faded. "He'll fight it," Henry said. "Yes," Clara said. "He will, and he'll lose." She said it not the way you say something you hope for, but the way you say something you have calculated from every available piece of evidence and arrived at with the cold, precise confidence of a woman who has been right about the numbers from the very beginning. Henry put his hand on her shoulder. He hadn't done that since she was a small child. It was an awkward gesture, unpracticed, the gesture of a man who is learning a language he should have been speaking for years. Clara didn't pull away. She stood at the gate with her father's hand on her shoulder and the evening coming down around them, and somewhere behind her, Rosalie moving in the house, and she thought about the first ledger book she had ever opened, 17 years old, sitting at this same kitchen table, because somebody had to write it all down. Somebody had to keep the true record of what this family had, what it owed, what it was worth. She had kept the record, and the record in the end was what was going to save them. The formal hearing at the county seat was scheduled for the 3rd week of September. Ethan was there when she arrived, standing outside the magistrate's building in the morning light, and when he saw her coming up the road with Rosalie beside her and Henry a step behind. Something in his face settled into a quality that Clara had started to recognize as particular to him. The expression he wore when something was going the way he had believed it would, and the belief had cost him something, and the proof was worth the cost. He fell into step beside her without ceremony. "Catherine Hartwell arrived last night," he said quietly. "Her documents have been reviewed. Aldrich says the magistrate has enough to issue a formal suspension of Boone's lending operations pending the full investigation." Clara absorbed that. "He won't be able to make new contracts." "Not legally, not in this state." The existing contracts. The Richmond contact believes at least 9 of them will be voided entirely based on the licensing chain. The others will be reviewed individually. He paused. The Whitaker debt is on the void list. Clara stopped walking. Ethan stopped beside her. "It's gone," she said. "It's gone," he said. "Or it will be formally within the month. You kept 8 years of records that prove the payment history and Boone's manufactured default conditions. The magistrate's reviewer said your documentation was the clearest record in the entire case." Clara stood very still in the September morning with that landing on her. Not just the information, but the weight of it. The specific weight of 8 years of pencil marks in 4 ledger books, finally meaning exactly what she had always known they meant. Rosalie took her hand. Clara squeezed it. "Come on," she said. "Let's go finish this." The hearing lasted 4 hours. Clara sat at the long table in the magistrate's room and answered every question put to her, with the same quality she had brought to the kitchen table on Thursday, specific, documented, unshakable. When Boone's legal representative tried to characterize her records as partial or biased, she opened the ledger to the relevant page and read the entries aloud in the flat, factual voice of someone who does not need the record to be believed, because the record speaks for itself. When Catherine Hartwell took her place at the table and laid out the original partnership documents, Boone's representative went quiet in the way lawyers go quiet when the ground has shifted under them, and they need a moment to find something solid to stand on. When James Haskell stood up and gave his statement, and then the Mercer son, and then a woman named Grace Boyd, who had come from 20 miles away specifically to say in front of a magistrate what Boone's contracts had cost her family. The room had a quality to it that Clara had not felt in a public gathering before. Not the buzzing social electricity of the church, social. Not the low cruelty of gossip moving through a crowd, but something older and weightier than either of those things. The quality of a truth that has been waiting in a closed room for a long time, finally let into the air. The magistrate was a compact, gray-haired man named Justice, who listened without expression and took his own notes in a hand almost as small as Clara's. When the hearing was finished, he did not deliberate visibly. He simply gathered his notes and said that he would have a formal ruling within the week, and that in the meantime, Boone's lending operations were suspended effective immediately. He looked as he said it at Silas Boone. Boone sat at the other end of the table with his legal representative beside him, and the leather satchel in front of him that he had arrived with on Thursday morning, full of contracts he had intended to use as weapons. And something in his face was very still, in the way that things go still when they have been defeated, and the man wearing the face has not yet decided how to carry that. He looked for a moment across the table at Clara. She looked back. She did not look away. She did not arrange her face into anything accommodating or careful or small. She looked at him directly the way she had been learning all summer to look at things directly, and she held his gaze until he was the one who looked away. It was a small thing, but it was the first time in Clara May Whitaker's 25 years that Silas Boone had been the one to look away. Ethan found her outside afterward, sitting on the step of the magistrate's building, with her ledger books in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance. He sat beside her without asking. "How do you feel?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Like I've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and I've just set it down, and my arms don't quite know what to do." "That sounds right," he said. They sat for a while. Down the street, Rosalie was talking with Catherine Hartwell, the two of them standing close together with the ease of women who have recognized something in each other quickly. Henry was on the steps of the building talking with James Haskell, and from where Clara sat, he had the look of a man who is learning slowly how to stand alongside people rather than above them. "Clara," Ethan said. She looked at him. "There's something I want to say. Something I've been waiting for the right time to say, which I now think was a mistake, because there is no right time for these things, you just have to say them." She waited. "I came to the church social that Sunday because I had heard about the water survey, and I wanted to look at the county's land patterns. That was true." He looked at her directly. "But I walked to the church door and I stood beside you because I wanted to. Because you were standing there with flour on your wrist and your chin up and the particular expression of a person who is holding themselves together through practice, rather than ease, and something in me." He stopped, found the words again. "Something in me knew immediately that you were the most substantial person in that churchyard, and I wanted to be where the most substantial person was." Clara looked at him. "That's a careful way of saying something," she said. "I'm a careful man," he said, "but I mean every word of it." The September morning was bright and clear around them, the summer finally beginning to loosen its grip, the air carrying something fresher and cleaner than August had offered. Clara looked at Ethan Cole sitting beside her on the step of the county magistrate's building with her ledger books in her lap, and 8 years of pencil marks that had just helped dismantle a man who had counted on her being too insignificant to matter. And she thought about the church social and the doorway and the flower on her wrist and the extraordinary tilting life-rearranging moment of someone walking across a room directly toward her. "I know you mean it," she said quietly. "Then I'd like—" He paused. "If you're willing, I'd like to keep meaning it, for a long time." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I think I would like that too." It was not a grand declaration. It was not the kind of thing that gets performed for an audience or announced with ceremony. It was two people sitting on a step in the September morning saying something true to each other, which is how the real things happen, not in the grand public moments, but in the quiet ones. The ones where you've finished the fight and the dust has settled, and you look beside you, and the person you want to be beside is there. Henry came down the steps behind them and paused when he saw them sitting together. He looked at his daughter, really looked the way he had started learning to look this summer, and something moved across his face that was gentler than anything Clara had seen on him in years. He kept walking. He gave them the moment. It was, Clara thought, a start. Rosalie caught her eye from across the street and smiled, not the careful social smile she had worn for 22 years, but the real one underneath it, the one Clara had only started seeing this summer, the one that belonged to Rosalie's actual face and not to anyone's expectation of it. The magistrate's ruling would come next week, the debts would be cleared, the water rights would hold, the legal record would stand. But what Clara carried out of that building on the September morning was not the victory, though the victory was real and hard-won, and hers. What she carried was the knowledge settled now permanent, not a hope, but a certainty that she had been right. About the numbers and the contracts and the creek and the county and herself. She had been right from the beginning. She had known it all along. Now everyone else did too. The magistrate's ruling came on a Tuesday. Aldrich brought it himself, which Clara had not expected. She was at the kitchen table with the fourth ledger open in front of her old habit. The pencil moving through the September figures, the numbers settling into the clean, unencumbered shape of a property that no longer carried Boone's weight on it. When she heard the horse at the gate and looked up and saw it was him, she was at the door before he knocked. He handed her the document without preamble. He was smiling, which was the first time she had seen him smile in all their dealings, and it changed his face into something considerably warmer than the careful professional instrument she had known him as. "Read page 2 first," he said. She read page 2. The Whitaker debt was declared void in its entirety. The original loan agreement was found to be fraudulent on 3 distinct grounds: the chain of title defect in Boone's lending license, the manufactured default conditions documented in Clara's ledger records, and the pattern of predatory practice established across 9 county families and confirmed by the Hartwell Partnership documents. The water rights on the South Creek were confirmed as belonging solely and permanently to the Whitaker property. All liens were dissolved. On page 3, the ruling noted that the documentation provided by Clara May Whitaker represented the most complete private financial record entered into a county legal proceeding in the magistrate's 12-year tenure. Clara read that sentence twice. Then she looked up at Aldrich and said very quietly, "It's done." "It's done," he said. She stood in the doorway for a moment with the ruling in her hands and let herself feel it fully. This time, not the careful, partial feeling of a woman who has learned not to celebrate before the fight is over. The fight was over. She let herself feel the whole of it. It was a large feeling. It took up more room than she expected. Henry came out of the back of the house, and she handed him the document without speaking. She watched his face as he read. She watched the moment when he reached page 2 and understood what it meant. His jaw tightened, and his eyes went bright in a way that men of Henry Whitaker's generation and disposition would never describe as tears, but which functioned in exactly that way. He folded the ruling carefully. He handed it back to Clara. "Put it with the ledgers," he said. His voice was rough. "Where it belongs." She did. Rosalie found out at noon, when Clara rode to the schoolhouse on the edge of town, where her sister had been spending 3 mornings a week since August helping the teacher with the younger children, an arrangement that had started as something to occupy her time and had become, in the quiet way that vocations announce themselves, something considerably more than that. Rosalie came out of the schoolhouse door when she heard the horse still holding the primer she'd been reading from, and one look at Clara's face told her everything before a word was spoken. "Oh," Rosalie said, and her face did the thing it had been doing more often these past weeks, the real expression coming to the surface, without the practiced social layer over it, open and unguarded and entirely herself. Clara dismounted, and they stood in the road outside the schoolhouse, and Rosalie put her arms around her sister and held on, and Clara let her. Which was also something new. Clara had spent so long being the one who held things together that being held by someone else felt strange and right in equal measure. "We're free," Rosalie said into her shoulder. "We're free," Clara agreed. They stood like that for a moment in the September morning, the two of them, and inside the schoolhouse, Clara could hear the murmur of children's voices, the sound of a lesson being waded through, and she thought about Rosalie spending her mornings in there, reading primers aloud, and helping small hands form letters, and how her sister's face had a quality in those mornings that it never had at church, socials, or family suppers. A lit-up, purposeful quality, the look of someone doing the thing they were actually made for. "I want to talk to you about something," Rosalie said, pulling back. "Something I've been thinking about." "Tell me." "The schoolmaster is leaving in the spring, moving west." Rosalie held her primer a little tighter. "There's going to be a position. Teaching. Full-time." She looked at Clara. "I want to apply for it." Clara looked at her sister. "A teaching position," she said. "I know it's not what Father expected." "Rosalie," Clara said. "Apply for it." Rosalie blinked. "Just like that." "You're good at it," Clara said. "I've seen you with those children. You have patience, and you have a way of explaining things that makes people feel capable instead of slow. Those are not small gifts." She paused. "And you've spent your whole life being what other people expected. I think it's time you tried being what you actually are." Rosalie looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that was complicated and grateful, and something else, the expression of a woman who has been seen clearly by someone she loves and is still getting used to how that feels. "When did you get so wise?" she said. "I've always been wise," Clara said. Nobody was listening. Rosalie laughed a real laugh, uncontrolled, the kind she didn't produce for audiences. She pressed her hand over her mouth and shook her head. "Go home, Clara. Go tell Ethan it's over." "I'm going," Clara said, and mounted her horse, and went. She found Ethan at the south fence line. Of course she did. She had found him at the south fence line more times than she could count now over the course of a summer that had begun with her standing alone against a church door and had become something she did not yet have a word large enough for. He was checking the corner posts she had pointed out to him in August, the ones that needed another 8 inches, and he turned when he heard the horse with the same expression he had worn every time she arrived. Somewhere he was the particular settling attention of a man for whom something has come right. She didn't dismount right away. She held up the folded ruling so he could see it. He looked at it. Then he looked at her face. "Page 2, she said. He walked to the horse, took the document from her hand, and read it standing in the pasture. She watched him read. She had become over the summer a student of Ethan Cole's face, in the way you become a student of something that repays close attention. The small movements, the particular quality of stillness he had when he was absorbing something important. The thing that happened around his eyes, when he felt something he was not going to make a performance of. He folded the ruling and handed it back to her. The creek, he said. Confirmed. Permanently. The debt. Gone entirely. The licensing challenge. Upheld on 3 grounds. Boone's operations are suspended pending a state review. She paused. Catherine Hartwell's attorney sent a message this morning. The state review is expected to cover every county he operated in. He's finished Ethan. Not just here. Everywhere. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You did that. You know that." "We did that," Clara said. "Your records did that," he said. 8 years of a woman writing down the truth in a book that nobody asked to read. That's what did it. Clara looked at him from the horse. "Somebody asked," she said. "Eventually." Something moved across his face, that not quite smile the shape of one, and then the real thing, slower and rarer, and entirely worth waiting for. "Come down from there," he said. "I want to show you something." She dismounted. He took the horse's reins and tied them to the fence post, and then he walked her along the creek bank to a place where the water ran clear over a flat shelf of stone she had walked past 100 times without stopping. He stopped there. "You see where the water runs fastest," he said. "Yes, that's the deepest channel. Clean all the way down, even in August." He looked at her. "I had the survey man check it twice. This creek will run clean through the driest year this county can produce. It has for 200 years probably. It'll run for 200 more. Clara looked at the water. "It's never going to fail," she said. "No," he said. "It's not." He paused. "This is what Boone was really after. Not the cattle, not the debt. This." He looked at the creek. "He knew what it was worth, and he counted on your father not knowing. He counted on no one listening to you." "He miscalculated," Clara said. "He did," Ethan said. He turned and looked at her directly, with the full, unhurried attention that she had never gotten used to, no matter how many times he gave it to her. "Clara, I want to say something, and I need you to let me finish it before you argue with any part of it." She raised her eyebrows. "I don't argue." "You absolutely argue," he said. "Which I respect entirely. But let me finish first." "All right." He turned to face her fully. He had his hat in his hand, and the September light was on him, and the creek was running behind them, and somewhere in the pasture, one of the cattle made a low, distant sound in the warmth. "I have watched you this summer," he said, "do things that most men in this county would not have had the knowledge or the courage to do. I have watched you face down a man twice your size and 3 times your resources and not flinch. I have watched you do it with documentation and precision and the particular kind of dignity that doesn't come from how people treat you. It comes from how you treat yourself." He held her gaze. "And I want to be clear that my regard for you, the thing I feel when I look at you, which is more than regard, which I have been calling regard, because I didn't want to speak before the time was right, it has nothing to do with any of that. It was there the minute I saw you standing at the church door with flour on your wrist and your chin up, before I knew about the ledgers or the creek or any of it." Clara was very still. "It was just you," he said. "That's all it was. Just you." The creek ran on behind them. The morning held itself quiet around the words. "Ethan," she said, "I'm not finished." She waited. "I'd like to ask you something," he said. "Properly, with your full understanding of what I'm asking and what I'm offering and what I believe you deserve, which is more than I can probably articulate right now, but which I intend to spend a considerable amount of time demonstrating." He paused. "Clara May Whitaker, would you be willing to let me court you properly, through the fall and the winter, and however long it takes for you to be certain, without pressure and without anyone else's timeline, just honestly, the way you do everything?" Clara looked at him. 25 years old. Standing at the creek bank on the property she had kept alive with her own hands and her own careful pencil marks. The debt gone. The water hers. The fight finished. and Ethan Cole standing in front of her asking her something that nobody in Harlan County would have predicted 2 months ago, asking her with the straightforward, unhurried certainty of a man who has made a decision and is not second-guessing it. "Yes," she said. "I'm willing." He exhaled just slightly, just enough for her to see it. The breath of a man who was more uncertain than he'd let on, and is now not. "Good," he said. "You were nervous," she said. "Considerably," he said. She almost smiled. "Good," she said in the same tone he'd used, and watched the not-quite smile come back to his face, full and real this time. The harvest dance was held on the last Saturday of September in the field behind the church, when the summer heat had finally released its grip, and the air had the clean, particular quality of early fall in Virginia, bright and cool, and carrying the smell of cut grain and wood smoke and turned earth. Clara wore a blue dress, not Rosalie's blue dress. Her own one she had sewn herself in the evenings over the past 2 weeks, plain and well-made, and cut to fit the woman she actually was, rather than the woman she'd been pressing herself small to approximate. It was a good dress. She knew it was a good dress because she had made it carefully, and she trusted her own work. She did not stand in the doorway this time. She walked in. She walked in beside Ethan Cole, who had arrived at the Whitaker gate at dusk, and offered her his arm with the simple directness of a man who has decided what he wants and has stopped pretending otherwise. She took it. They walked to the harvest dance together, and when the county turned to look, because Harlan County had spent a summer watching something it hadn't understood, and was still in the process of revising its understanding, she looked back at them without arranging her face into anything apologetic or small. Mabel Garrett caught her eye first and smiled a genuine smile, the kind that has something slightly abashed in it, the smile of a woman who has been carrying a small guilt and is glad to have a chance to set it down. The Reverend's wife found her within minutes and took both her hands and said, "You look wonderful, Clara," with the warm emphasis of a woman who has been meaning that exact sentence for longer than she's been saying it. James Haskell crossed the field to shake her hand, and then his wife pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace and said, "We owe you more than we can say." And Clara said, "You owe me nothing. You did your own part," which was true, and which Mrs. Haskell seemed to need to hear. Catherine Hartwell was there, which Clara had not expected. She had returned to her own county after the hearing, but had apparently made the trip back for the dance, and when Clara spotted her across the field, talking to Rosalie with the easy comfort of two women who have become genuine friends quickly, she felt a warmth in her chest that was specifically for that, for the friendship that had grown between them, for the network of women who had quietly been keeping records and waiting for the moment when the records would matter. And then, someone Clara never found out who, though she suspected Mabel Garrett's husband, who played fiddle at every county gathering, started the music. Ethan turned to her. He didn't ask with words. He just held out his hand. She took it. They danced. Clara Whitaker, who had never been asked to dance at a county gathering in her life, who had stood in doorways and along walls, while her sister was claimed for every reel, danced in the field behind the Harlan County Church on the last Saturday of September, with Ethan Cole's hand at her back, and the fiddle going, and the whole county watching, and something so enormous and simple moving through her chest that she couldn't have named it if she'd tried. It felt like arriving somewhere she had always been going without knowing it. It felt like being home in a way that had nothing to do with a house. Halfway through the second dance, a voice near the edge of the crowd said, not quietly enough, "Reckon he could have had the pretty sister." Clara heard it. She felt Ethan's hand at her back shift slightly, a small, barely perceptible movement that told her he had heard it too. He stopped dancing. He did it without drama, without anger, without the theatrical display of a man making a point for an audience. He simply stopped, turned toward the voice, and found the face that had said it, a man named Purvis, middle-aged, the kind of man who says things at the edge of gatherings because he is too careful to say them in the center. Ethan looked at him. Purvis went slightly red. "I chose the woman I chose," Ethan said. His voice was conversational and clear, and carried easily in the way that quiet voices carry when the people around them go still. "And I'd do it again. Every time." He turned back to Clara. He held out his hand again. She took it again. They kept dancing, and the fiddle played, and the field was full of people, and the September night came down cool and clean around them, and Clara felt something she had been carrying for 25 years. The small, persistent belief that she was not the one people walked toward, not the one people chose, not the one anyone would cross a room for. She felt it dissolve, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a weight dissolves when you finally set it down and the body begins to understand that it doesn't have to brace for it anymore. She was not invisible. She had never been invisible. She had simply been in a room full of people who hadn't learned to see yet. It was late when the dancing ended and the crowd thinned and the field began its slow quiet settling back into just a field. Henry had gone home an hour ago, tired in the way men go tired when they have been carrying shame alongside relief for weeks, and the two together are heavier than either one alone. Rosalie had stayed to help Mrs. Caldwell with the tables, which was the kind of thing Rosalie did now, not because it was expected of her, but because she wanted to. Clara and Ethan walked back toward the gate in the dark, unhurried, the night air cool against the warmth of the dancing, their steps easy and matching the way two people's steps match when they've been moving alongside each other long enough to stop thinking about it. "I want to ask you something," Clara said. "Ask." "The partnership," she said. "The arrangement you proposed back in August, about stabilizing the cattle operation. I want to discuss the terms formally. Written down with both our signatures specifying exactly what the Cole Ranch contributes and what the Whitaker Ranch retains." Ethan looked at her. "You want a contract?" "I want a clear record," she said. "I've seen what happens to people who do business on a handshake and a good intention. I'd like ours to be on paper." Something moved in his face, that quality again of a man watching someone do exactly what they were made for. "Clara Whitaker," he said, "if we ever do marry, I am going to be a man with very well-documented finances." She felt the warmth of that, the casual, easy way he'd folded the future into a sentence, the way you do when the future is not a question, but a direction. She did not let herself go giddy with it. She let herself feel it steadily, the way you feel a good thing, when you have learned to trust that good things can be real. "You're going to be a man who knows exactly where every dollar goes, and why," she said. "Yes." "I look forward to it," he said. They walked on. "Clara," he said after a moment. "I want you to know something, about this summer, about all of it." He was quiet for a beat. "You didn't need me. I want to be clear that I understand that. You had the records and the knowledge and the courage before I ever walked across that churchyard. Whatever you have built, the case, the legal record, the relationships with the families, that is yours. I was a door you used because it was available. The walk through it was all you." Clara considered that. "You were more than a door," she said finally. "I'd like to be," he said. "I'd like to be considerably more than that, for a long time." "You already are," she said. And she meant it the way she meant everything she said, precisely after consideration, with full understanding of the weight of the words. He reached over in the dark and took her hand. She let him. They walked like that the rest of the way to the gate, hand in hand. Not talking, the night around them full of cricket sound and wood smoke and the particular quality of a county that has been through something and come out the other side of it, changed. The Whitaker property in October was a different place than it had been in August. Not because the land had changed. The land was the land. Same pastures, same fence lines, same South Creek running clear over its flat shelf of stone. But the weight of the debt was gone, and in the absence of that weight, everything sat differently. The cattle moved with more ease. Henry worked with more purpose. The kitchen table, where Clara still kept the ledgers open in the mornings, had a quality of forward planning rather than defensive management numbers that were building something rather than holding something back. Rosalie submitted her application for the teaching position on a Wednesday in October in a letter she wrote herself in her own hand without asking anyone to check it. She showed it to Clara before she sent it, and Clara read it and said only, "Send it," because it was good and it was true, and it needed nothing from her. The position would be confirmed in the spring. Clara already knew Rosalie would get it. Catherine Hartwell wrote from her county to say that the state review of Boone's operations had uncovered 2 more fraudulent licensing arrangements in neighboring counties, and that 3 families who had believed their land losses were permanent were now in the process of legal recovery. She ended the letter with, "I have never met a woman whose account books have done more good in the world than yours. I intend to say so wherever I am given the opportunity." Clara read that letter 3 times, and then put it with the ruling and the ledgers where the true record of things lived. Ethan came to the property every few days. Sometimes to work, they were already implementing the water management plan he had developed with the surveyor in August, and the results on the south pasture were visible within weeks. Sometimes to sit on the porch in the evening with Clara and talk about the land or the cattle or the legal correspondence from Richmond or whatever was in the newspaper. And sometimes to sit without talking, which was something they had both discovered they were good at, together. The particular ease of a silence that doesn't need to be filled. Henry watched them with an expression that had settled over the weeks into something Clara had not seen on his face in years. Something quiet and warm and rightly humble. He didn't speak about it directly. He was not and probably never would be a man built for direct emotional speech, but he showed it in the way he had started showing things by doing them. By asking Clara's opinion on the cattle decisions before making them. By telling the man at the feed store when the man assumed Ethan was the one managing the Whitaker water arrangements. "No, that's my daughter's work. She's the one you talk to about the land." It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. On the last warm Sunday of October, when the trees had turned and the air had the particular smell of the season giving way, Clara walked the full fence line of the Whitaker property alone. She did it deliberately, the way you do something you want to remember. She walked the south fence with its reset corner posts solid now the way they should have been in April. She walked the creek bank and listened to the water and felt the particular satisfaction of something that is exactly what it was always supposed to be running, exactly where it was always supposed to run, unchallenged and undisputed, and belonging to her family by legal record and by right. She walked the high pasture and the north field and the gate road and the kitchen yard, and she carried the full weight of the property in her mind the way she always had its worth, and its debts, and its water, and its soil, except that the weight of it now was clean. It was not the weight of a burden. It was the weight of something that belongs to you. She stood at the south fence in the October afternoon and looked at everything that was hers, and thought about a 17-year-old girl opening the first ledger book because somebody had to write it down. She thought about April and the contract clause, and her father's dismissal, and the quiet, cold way she had filed it in herself, alongside all the other true things nobody had wanted to hear from her. She thought about the church social and the bread basket and the flower on her wrist and the extraordinary, improbable, world-rearranging moment of a man crossing a room directly toward her. She thought about standing in front of Silas Boone in the kitchen and saying, "I am not land. I am not cattle. I am not a debt to be settled." She thought about the way those words had felt coming out, not like something new, but like something that had always been true, finally getting to be said in the light. She stood at the fence with the October air around her, and the creek running behind her, and the whole of the changed world in front of her, and she felt not triumph exactly, though there was triumph in it. Not relief, though there was relief. Something more durable than either of those things. Something that doesn't depend on what has just happened or what might happen next. Something that lives in the center of a person who has finally stopped waiting for the world to tell her who she is. She knew who she was. She had always known. She was Clara May Whitaker, 25 years old, and she kept the true record of things in 4 ledger books with small, careful pencil marks, and she had been right about every number she had ever written down, and the county, and the magistrate, and the law of the state of Virginia had all arrived eventually at the same conclusion she had been sitting on since April. She was not the rejected daughter. She was not the plain one, the useful one, the one left in the doorway with the breadbasket while the world arranged itself around her sister. She was the one who had held the truth of this land in her hands for 8 years and refused to put it down. She was the one who had stood in the summer dust and looked back at the man walking toward her and said yes without flinching, because she had always known she was worth walking toward. She was the strongest one. She had been the strongest one all along. And now, on her own land, under her own name, with her own hand on the fence post, she had reset herself, and the creek running clear where she had always known it would run. She finally let herself believe it. Not because Ethan Cole had chosen her. Not because the magistrate had validated her records. Not because her father had finally looked at her and seen what was there. Because it was true. It had always been true. And the truth, Clara May Whitaker had learned, does not require anyone's permission to exist. It just requires someone willing to write it down.